Look around your classroom, your campus, your city. Now ask yourself something uncomfortable. If someone collapsed right next to you, would anyone actually help? Not film it. Not walk past it. Not pretend they didn't see. Actually help. This video isn't about bad people. It's about something quieter and more dangerous. A slow collapse of basic decency. A culture where caring is mocked, cruelty is rewarded, and ignoring suffering feels normal. We're not talking about villains. We're talking about everyday moments and the choices we make when no one is watching. Because when a society loses its moral minimum, it doesn't fall apart all at once. It grows cold. And by the end of this video, you'll see how that coldness is shaping schools, friendships, mental health, and the future you're stepping into, whether you notice it or not. Please like, subscribe, turn on notifications, and comment the next video topic in the comments. Something is happening inside American classrooms that most people can feel, but few know how to describe. Teachers sense it. Students experience it. Parents worry about it. And yet, it's rarely named directly. It's not just stress. It's not just social media. It's not just politics or technology or changing norms. It's something deeper. A slow erosion of basic decency. The everyday behaviors that make shared spaces feel safe, humane, and cooperative. For generations, schools were more than places of learning. They were training grounds for social life. You learn math and reading, yes, but you also learned how to wait your turn, how to listen, how to disagree without humiliating someone, how to recognize that other people's feelings mattered. Those lessons were rarely written down. They were absorbed through tone, through correction, through modeling, through consequence. Today, many of those lessons are missing. Not because students are worse than before. Not because teachers stopped caring. Not because families suddenly forgot values. But because the environment itself has changed, and the incentives inside it now reward something very different. For American students today, compassion is no longer a neutral trait. It has become a risk. In classrooms, online spaces, and social groups, showing empathy can invite ridicule. Offering understanding can be framed as weakness. Standing up for someone else can get you labeled, isolated, or targeted. This didn't emerge randomly. Young people are extremely sensitive to social feedback. They learn quickly what is rewarded and what is punished. And increasingly, what's rewarded is detachment. Sarcasm gets laughs. Cruel humor gets attention. Public embarrassment becomes entertainment. Meanwhile, genuine concern is treated with suspicion. Students learn this early. They see videos go viral for humiliating others. They see kindness dismissed as fake or performative. They see empathy framed as something only certain types of people do, and not always in a flattering way. Over time, many students make an unconscious calculation. Caring openly isn't worth the cost. So they stop showing it. Not because they don't feel it, but because feeling something and expressing it are now two very different things. This creates a strange emotional contradiction inside schools. Students may privately care deeply, but publicly act indifferent. And that gap breeds cynicism. American students today are surrounded by aggressive communication. Not always violent, but sharp, dismissive, hostile. They see adults argue by interrupting. They see public figures mock opponents instead of engaging ideas. They see online debates where the goal isn't understanding, it's domination. This becomes the model. So when students disagree, they often skip curiosity and go straight to confrontation. Questions become challenges. Differences become threats. Mistakes become ammunition. In many classrooms, teachers now spend more time managing tone than teaching content. Not because students are out of control, but because aggression has become normalized as a default way to interact. Even silence can carry hostility. Eye-rolling, scoffing, whispered commentary. These behaviors aren't random, they're learned. And once they're learned, they're hard to unlearn. Because aggression feels powerful. It creates distance. It establishes dominance. It protects against vulnerability. For students who already feel uncertain, ignored, or insecure, aggression becomes armor. And armor, once worn long enough, starts to feel like skin. American schools used to emphasize collective responsibility, even if imperfectly. Classrooms had shared rules. Hallways had shared expectations. Communities reinforced shared standards. Today, many students experience school as a series of isolated bubbles. My desk, my schedule, my device, my outcome. Responsibility becomes individualized. If someone is struggling, that's their issue. If a class environment is tense, that's the teacher's problem. If a peer is being excluded, that's not my business. This mindset isn't born from cruelty. It's born from overload. Students are constantly told to focus on themselves. Your grades, your mental health, your future, your brand. While self-care matters, when taken to extremes, it erodes communal care. The message students absorb is subtle but powerful. You are responsible for yourself, and that's where your responsibility ends. Once that belief takes hold, decency becomes optional. Helping others becomes extra. Speaking up becomes risky. Looking away becomes easier. And over time, indifference feels like maturity. American students are more connected than ever and less bonded than ever. They communicate constantly, but often shallowly. Messages replace conversations. Reactions replace responses. Visibility replaces understanding. Friendships can be ended silently. Conflicts can be avoided rather than resolved. People can be removed from one's life without explanation. This creates a culture where relationships feel temporary. And when relationships feel temporary, investment feels foolish. Why build trust if it might disappear tomorrow? Why show care if it won't be returned? Why risk emotional exposure? So students protect themselves by staying surface level. They joke instead of share. They deflect instead of explain. They disengage instead of repair. This doesn't mean students don't want connection. It means they don't feel safe pursuing it deeply. And without deep connection, decency erodes, because decency grows strongest where people feel seen. Imagine walking into a classroom where no one is openly cruel, but no one is openly kind. No one causes chaos, but no one creates warmth. No one intervenes, because no one wants attention. This is what erosion looks like. It's quiet. It's subtle. It's emotionally exhausting. Teachers feel it when students disengage emotionally. Students feel it when classrooms feel cold rather than tense. Learning suffers because safety isn't just physical, it's social. When decency fades, curiosity fades too. Students become guarded. Participation drops. Mistakes feel dangerous. And education becomes transactional. Do the work. Get the grade. Move on. Something human is lost. American students don't leave this mindset at graduation. They carry it into workplaces, into communities, into leadership. If decency is optional in school, it becomes optional in adulthood. If indifference is normalized early, it becomes instinctive later. That's why this isn't just about behavior. It's about culture formation. Schools don't just teach content. They teach what kind of people society values. And right now, the lesson many students are absorbing is this. Care quietly. Don't stand out. Don't get involved. Protect yourself first. But that lesson comes at a cost. And the cost becomes visible when indifference stops being passive and starts becoming deliberate. That's where willful indifference enters. And that's exactly what we'll explore next. In the last section, we talked about erosion, the slow fading of everyday decency. Now we move into something darker. Because erosion doesn't stop at absence, it eventually turns into choice. This is where willful indifference begins. Willful indifference is not the same as apathy. Apathy is numbness. Indifference is distance. Willful indifference is awareness without action. It's seeing harm and deciding not to engage. It's recognizing suffering and choosing comfort instead. It's knowing better and opting out anyway. And among American students, this mindset is becoming increasingly common. Not because students are heartless, but because the environment teaches them that involvement is dangerous, exhausting, or pointless. Many students don't start indifferent. They start overwhelmed. They see bullying, exclusion, emotional distress, and unfairness. But they also see what happens to people who speak up. They get targeted. They get dragged into drama. They get misunderstood. They get labeled. So students adapt. They don't deny harm exists. They simply decide it's not their responsibility. This shift matters. Because once indifference becomes a decision rather than a feeling, it starts shaping behavior consistently. Students stop making eye contact. Stop checking in. Stop offering help. Not out of malice, but out of self-protection. Over time, this behavior stops feeling like avoidance and starts feeling like normal social hygiene. Mind your business. Stay in your lane. Don't get involved. What sounds mature on the surface slowly becomes corrosive underneath. Walk through a typical American school hallway. You'll see students physically close but emotionally distant. Someone drops their books, others step around them. Someone sits alone, few acknowledge it. Someone looks distressed, phones come out, not conversations. This isn't because students don't notice. They do. They just calculate risk faster than empathy. Helping might draw attention. Asking might require commitment. Noticing might obligate action. So the safest option becomes silence. Social indifference shows up in subtle ways. Ignoring someone being teased. Laughing along to avoid standing out. Choosing neutrality when harm is visible. Each decision feels small, but repeated daily, they become cultural norms. And norms teach students what kind of people they're expected to be. In past generations, the bystander effect was often explained as confusion. People didn't act because they assumed someone else would. Today, among students, it looks different. Students often know no one else will act. They simply decide that they won't be the one either. Why? Because modern school culture often punishes involvement more than inaction. If you intervene, you risk being filmed. If you speak up, you risk being misinterpreted. If you help, you risk becoming the story. So students develop a new rule. Don't add yourself to the problem, even if that means letting harm continue. This isn't apathy. It's strategic withdrawal. Willful indifference doesn't stop with students. In American schools, students also observe adults disengaging, emotionally and morally. Teachers overwhelmed by workload. Administrators constrained by policy. Systems designed to manage liability, not humanity. This doesn't mean educators don't care. It means caring has become expensive. When students report issues, they sometimes see slow responses. When concerns are raised, they may see them minimized. When harm occurs, they may see procedural language replace moral urgency. Students notice, and they learn. They learn that responsibility is often deflected upward or outward. They learn that silence is safer than escalation. They learn that systems protect themselves first. Over time, this models institutional indifference, and students internalize it as realism. In many institutions, safety is addressed through policy rather than presence. Forms are filled out. Protocols are followed. Boxes are checked. But human signals get missed. A student withdrawing socially. A student acting out emotionally. A student clearly asking for help indirectly. When systems are stretched thin, emotional nuance gets lost. Students sense this quickly. They stop expecting care. They stop seeking help. They stop trusting systems to intervene meaningfully. This creates a feedback loop. Less engagement leads to less response. Less response leads to more withdrawal. And indifference hardens on both sides. Online spaces amplify willful indifference like nothing else. American students spend enormous portions of their lives in digital environments where consequences feel abstract. You can unfollow someone instantly, mute discomfort, block accountability, scroll past suffering. Algorithms reward reaction, not responsibility. Outrage spreads faster than understanding. Mockery travels farther than care. Falsehood often outperforms truth. Students learn quickly. Attention matters more than accuracy. Visibility matters more than impact. Engagement matters more than ethics. And because online harm rarely feels immediate, indifference becomes easy. You're not ignoring a person, just a post. You're not dismissing pain, just content. This distance rewires moral instincts. One of the most dangerous lessons students learn online is disposability. Friendships can be ended without explanation. Reputations can be damaged without repair. People can be erased with a click. When relationships feel disposable, accountability disappears. Why apologize if you can disappear? Why repair if you can replace? Why care if consequences are delayed or diffused? This mindset bleeds offline. Students become quicker to cut people off, less willing to work through conflict, more comfortable abandoning rather than resolving. Indifference becomes efficient, and efficiency starts replacing decency. Another driver of willful indifference is exhaustion. American students are bombarded with crises, social issues, global problems, constant emergencies. At some point, emotional capacity runs out. Students don't stop caring because they want to. They stop because they feel they have to. They learn to ration empathy. Save it for close friends. Save it for personal survival. Save it for when it really matters. The problem is that once empathy becomes rationed, everyday decency becomes optional. And optional decency quickly becomes rare. Perhaps the most troubling manifestation of willful indifference is normalization. When students see harm repeatedly without response, it stops shocking them. Bullying becomes just how it is. Exclusion becomes expected. Cruel humor becomes standard. Students adjust their expectations downward. They don't demand kindness. They just hope for neutrality. And when neutrality becomes the best-case scenario, something fundamental has already been lost. It's important to say this clearly. This is not about accusing students of moral failure. Students are responding logically to the world they've been placed in. A world that rewards speed over reflection. A world that punishes vulnerability. A world that treats care as optional labor. Willful indifference is an adaptation. But adaptations shape futures. And when indifference becomes widespread, it reshapes culture itself. When willful indifference becomes normal, it doesn't stay isolated. It spreads into peer groups, into institutions, into national culture, and eventually, it raises a larger question. Why did this happen in the first place? What forces created an environment where caring feels risky and indifference feels rational? That's what we need to understand next. Because the roots of this shift run deeper than behavior. They run through values, systems, technology, and identity. And that's exactly where we're going next. By now, we've seen what the erosion of decency looks like. We've seen how willful indifference shows up in daily life, classrooms, hallways, institutions, and online spaces. But none of this happened randomly. Cultures don't drift by accident. Values don't vanish overnight. What we're seeing is the result of powerful forces working together, slowly, quietly, and consistently. To understand why American students are becoming more indifferent, more detached, and more self-focused, we have to look at the environment shaping them. Because students don't grow in isolation. They grow inside systems. American culture has always valued independence. That wasn't the problem. The problem is what independence slowly turned into. Somewhere along the way, independence stopped meaning self-reliance and started meaning self-priority. Not, I can stand on my own, but I don't owe anyone anything. This shift is subtle, but massive. Students absorb it early. They're told to build their personal brand, to focus on their future, to protect their energy, to optimize themselves. All good ideas, until they crowd out responsibility for others. When everything becomes about personal success, other people start to feel like obstacles or background noise. Empathy begins to look inefficient. Community begins to look optional. Decency begins to look like extra work. And once students internalize that mindset, indifference stops feeling immoral. It starts feeling practical. Many American students grow up in dense, fast-moving environments, not just cities, but crowded social spaces. Schools with hundreds or thousands of students. Online spaces with endless voices. Constant stimulation. When humans are surrounded by too many people, they subconsciously protect themselves by narrowing emotional focus. You can't care deeply about everyone, so you care deeply about almost no one. Students learn to filter people out. They stop noticing strangers. They stop acknowledging others' presence. They stop engaging unless necessary. This isn't cruelty. It's overload. But over time, emotional filtering becomes emotional detachment. And detachment becomes indifference. If hyper-individualism sets the stage, the digital world accelerates everything. American students have never known a world without screens. Phones are not tools, they're environments. And environments shape behavior. Online life trains students to move quickly, react emotionally, and disengage instantly. Scroll, swipe, skip, discard. This constant motion teaches an important lesson. Nothing needs sustained attention, including people. When discomfort appears, you scroll past it. When conflict arises, you mute it. When someone annoys you, you block them. These behaviors make sense online, but students don't leave them behind when they log off. They bring them into real life. Another major shift is how morality itself is performed online. Caring becomes something you display, not something you practice. Students learn how to signal values publicly while remaining personally detached. They repost the right message, use the right language, align with the right side. But when action is required, real effort, real risk, participation drops. This creates a strange dynamic. Moral awareness without moral engagement. Students know what's right. They just don't feel obligated to act on it. And because morality becomes performative, indifference becomes invisible. You can look caring without actually caring. American students are growing up under constant observation. Phones record everything. Screenshots last forever. Mistakes travel fast. This creates fear. Fear of saying the wrong thing. Fear of helping the wrong person. Fear of being misunderstood. So students choose safety. They stay neutral. They stay silent. They stay uninvolved. Indifference becomes a shield. Not caring publicly feels safer than caring imperfectly. Another quiet driver is what students are no longer being taught. In many schools and homes, moral education has faded. Not rules. Rules are everywhere. But ethics. Questions like, what do we owe each other? What does kindness look like in daily life? When is it right to intervene? What responsibilities come with freedom? Without these conversations, students are left to learn morality from peers, platforms, and algorithms. And those systems don't prioritize decency. They prioritize engagement, which often means outrage, mockery, and division. Many American students also grow up watching exhausted adults. Parents working long hours. Caretakers stressed and overwhelmed. Less time for reflection, conversation, or modeling care. This isn't a failure of love. It's a failure of capacity. When survival takes priority, moral reflection gets postponed. Students absorb that too. They learn that empathy is something you practice when you have extra energy, not something you owe by default. One of the most powerful cultural drivers today is the idea that everyone is the main character of their own story. This concept is everywhere in student culture. Your life is your journey. Your goals matter most. Your feelings come first. Again, not inherently bad. But when taken to extremes, it dehumanizes others. Other people become supporting characters, background figures, NPCs. Their struggles feel less real. Their needs feel less urgent. This mindset quietly erodes decency. Because decency requires recognizing that other people's lives matter just as much as yours. American education often reinforces individualism structurally. Grades are personal. Rankings are competitive. Success is individual. Collaboration exists, but competition dominates. Students learn early that helping others might hurt their own standing. Sharing answers is cheating. Helping too much is suspicious. Standing out matters. This trains students to prioritize self-advancement over mutual support. And over time, it rewires instinct. Students receive conflicting messages. Be kind, but don't be weak. Be empathetic, but don't get involved. Stand up for others, but protect yourself first. Without clarity, students default to self-preservation. Indifference becomes the safest compromise. When all these forces combine, they don't just change behavior. They change identity. Students start to see themselves as isolated units navigating a hostile world. Trust feels risky. Community feels fragile. Care feels costly. And when an entire generation internalizes that worldview, the consequences don't stay personal. They become societal. Which brings us to the final question. What happens when decency erodes at scale? What kind of society emerges when trust disappears and indifference becomes normal? That's where we're going next. When decency erodes, it doesn't disappear all at once. It fades quietly. At first, it looks like small things. People stop making eye contact. Stop holding doors. Stop stepping in. Nothing dramatic. Nothing headline-worthy. But over time, those small changes stack. And eventually, society begins to feel colder. Not because everyone became cruel, but because too many people stopped caring enough to act. This is where the erosion of decency stops being personal and becomes structural. Every healthy society runs on trust. Trust that people will follow basic rules. Trust that others will help in emergencies. Trust that institutions exist to protect, not ignore. When decency declines, trust erodes first. American students are growing up in a world where trust feels optional or even naive. They're told, don't rely on anyone. Don't expect help. Protect yourself first. And when trust disappears, cooperation becomes harder. Group projects become battlegrounds. Communities fragment. Public spaces feel tense. People stop assuming good intent. They assume indifference, or worse. In a society with strong decency norms, helping is automatic. You see someone fall, you help. You see someone struggling, you check in. But in a society shaped by indifference, help becomes rare. And when it does appear, it's treated with suspicion. Students hesitate to intervene because they fear consequences. What if I say the wrong thing? What if I get recorded? What if it backfires? so they don't act. Not because they're heartless, but because the cost of caring feels too high. This creates a dangerous feedback loop. The less people help, the more abnormal help feels. And the more abnormal help feels, the less likely people are to offer it. Indifference never affects everyone equally. It hits the most vulnerable first and hardest. Students with disabilities. Students experiencing mental health struggles. Students facing poverty, bullying, or isolation. In a culture of decency, these students are protected by informal norms. People notice. People intervene. People care. In a culture of indifference, they disappear. Their suffering becomes background noise. And once suffering becomes invisible, it becomes acceptable. Bullying doesn't always look like open cruelty anymore. It often looks like silence, like exclusion, like ignoring, like pretending someone doesn't exist. This kind of harm is harder to detect and harder to stop because there's no single villain, just a crowd that didn't step in. American students are increasingly exposed to this quieter form of harm. And because it doesn't look dramatic, it's often dismissed. But its impact is deep. Isolation rewires the brain. It erodes self-worth. It teaches people they don't matter. Schools, workplaces, and systems don't exist outside culture. They reflect it. As indifference spreads, institutions begin to feel colder too. Rules replace judgment. Procedures replace care. Liability replaces responsibility. Students experience this as bureaucracy without humanity. Forms instead of conversations. Policies instead of understanding. This reinforces the belief that no one is really looking out for you. And once students believe that, they stop looking out for others. Democracy depends on more than laws. It depends on people believing others deserve dignity, even when they disagree. When decency erodes, disagreement turns hostile. Political differences stop being about ideas and start being about identity. Opponents become enemies. Neighbors become threats. American students are growing up in an environment where aggression feels normal and compromise feels suspicious. That weakens democratic habits before adulthood even begins. One of the most dangerous outcomes of indifference is numbness. When students see suffering constantly, online, in news, in daily life, and feel powerless to change it, they emotionally shut down. Not caring becomes a coping mechanism. But numbness doesn't stay targeted. It spreads. Students who shut down emotionally struggle to form deep relationships, trust others, or feel meaning. Life becomes transactional, efficient, empty. Ironically, indifference creates loneliness, even surrounded by people. American students report high levels of isolation, not because they lack contact, but because they lack connection. When interactions are shallow, people feel unseen. And when people feel unseen long enough, they stop showing up authentically. This further erodes decency, because it's harder to care about people you don't feel connected to. The most dangerous outcome isn't cruelty. It's the loss of a shared moral minimum, that invisible line everyone agrees not to cross. When that line fades, behavior becomes unpredictable. People no longer know what to expect from one another. Fear replaces trust. Defensiveness replaces openness. This is how societies fragment, not with explosions, but with silence. Here's the most important part. Decency can erode, but it can also be rebuilt. Cultures change when enough people decide something matters again. And students are not just victims of this shift. They're the key to reversing it. Small actions matter. Acknowledging someone. Stepping in once. Choosing care when indifference feels easier. Decency spreads the same way indifference does, quietly, consistently, and socially. So here's the question this entire video leads to. If indifference is now the default, what kind of society will we become? And more importantly, what kind of people are we choosing to be when no one is forcing us to care? Because the future isn't shaped by the loudest voices. It's shaped by what the rest of us are willing to ignore. And that choice is being made, every day, in small moments that seem insignificant, until they aren't. Don't forget to subscribe on your way out. See you next video.